The security camera captured everything: the woman next door, creeping across Sarah's backyard at 3 a.m., plastic jug in hand, pouring something toxic into the pristine pool water. But for 3 weeks, she'd been standing on Sarah's doorstep, tears streaming down her face, begging her to please stop poisoning my dog. The chemical burns on little Bella's paws were real. The dying fish in the nearby pond were real. The veterinary bills were real. But the poison wasn't coming from where anyone thought. And when Sarah finally pressed play on that footage, she realized her neighbor wasn't just a liar. She was a monster, willing to kill her own pet to destroy someone else's life. The doorbell rang at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, pulling Sarah Chen from her morning coffee routine. Through the frosted glass, she could see the familiar silhouette of her neighbor, Linda Morrison, clutching something against her chest. Sarah's stomach tightened. This was the 4th time this week. "Sarah, please," Linda's voice cracked the moment the door opened. "You have to help me." "Bella's getting worse." The small golden retriever puppy trembled in Linda's arms, her usually lustrous coat dull and patchy. Raw, weeping sores dotted her paws, and her breathing came in shallow pants. Sarah's heart clenched despite herself. "Linda, I've told you. Look at her." Linda thrust the puppy forward, and Sarah instinctively stepped back. "The vet says it's chemical burns." "Chemical burns, Sarah, from pool water." Sarah's jaw tightened. "My pool water is properly balanced. I have it tested twice a week." "Then explain this." Linda's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. "She only gets sick after she drinks from the storm drain that runs from your backyard, the one that carries your pool overflow." "That's not how pool maintenance works," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice level. "And I've never seen Bella drinking from any storm drain." "You're not always watching." Linda's eyes were red-rimmed. Mascara smudged. "Please, just could you stop using so many chemicals? Or maybe install a better filtration system? I'll pay for it. I'll do anything." Sarah looked at the suffering animal and felt the familiar twist of guilt in her chest. For 3 weeks, this scene had played out with increasing frequency. Linda would appear at her door, sometimes at dawn, sometimes late at night, always with Bella getting progressively sicker. The vet bills, Linda waved around, were rails Sarah had seen them: the $800 for emergency treatment, the $400 for specialized shampoos, the $200 for blood work. "I maintain my pool exactly as recommended," Sarah said finally. "The chlorine levels are within normal range. I use the same products every pool owner uses." "But you use so much more," Linda pressed. "I see you out there constantly, adding chemicals, running that pump all night. Mrs. Rodriguez down the street said you were obsessed with keeping it perfect." Heat flushed Sarah's cheeks. "I take care of my property. That's not obsession." "Then why won't you just try reducing the chemicals for 2 weeks? Just 2 weeks to see if Bella gets better." Sarah stared at the puppy, whose tail gave a weak wag despite her obvious distress. The guilt was crushing. She'd worked 2 jobs for 3 years to afford this house, to have something that was truly hers. The pool had been her one indulgence, her sanctuary. But if it was somehow hurting an innocent animal, "I'll have the water tested again," Sarah said. "By a professional company this time." Linda's face crumpled with relief. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. I knew you'd understand. You have such a good heart." As Linda walked away, cradling Bella, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. Despite the puppy's obvious suffering, Linda's designer purse was new. Her nails were freshly manicured. Her highlights looked expensive. For someone drowning? In vet bills, she seemed to be managing her finances remarkably well. Sarah shook off the thought. She was being unfair. People had different priorities with money. 2 days later, AquaClear Pool Services arrived with their comprehensive testing kit. David Martinez, the owner, had been in the business for 15 years and came highly recommended. "Your neighbor thinks my pool is making her dog sick," Sarah explained as David collected water samples. "I need to know for certain that everything is safe." David tested pH levels, chlorine content, total alkalinity, and calcium hardness. He checked for algae, bacteria, and unusual chemical residues. After 45 minutes, he looked up with a frown. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what your neighbor's talking about. These are some of the most perfectly balanced pool readings I've seen. Your chlorine is at 2.1 ppm, ideal range is 1.0 to 3.0. Your pH is 7.4, which is textbook perfect. There's absolutely nothing in this water that would harm an animal. Sarah felt a mix of relief and confusion. Are you certain? I drink this water myself, David said. Actually, it's cleaner than most tap water. Whatever's wrong with that dog, it's not coming from your pool. That evening, Sarah knocked on Linda's door with David's official report. Linda answered in a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. Oh, Sarah, how are you? I had my pool professionally tested. Sarah handed over the report. The water is perfectly safe. Actually, it's exceptionally clean. Linda's face went through a series of microexpressions: surprise, disappointment, and something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Well, that's good news. But the vet was very clear about the chemical burns. Maybe Bella's getting into something else, another neighbor's pool, or cleaning supplies. No, I watch her constantly. She only goes in our yard and occasionally to the storm drain area. Linda's voice took on a defensive edge. The timeline matches perfectly with when you started your intensive pool maintenance routine. Sarah felt her patience fraying. Linda, I've been maintaining my pool the exact same way for 2 years. Nothing has changed, but you've been more thorough lately. I see you out there at night sometimes, adding chemicals. I add chemicals during the day, after work, never at night. Linda's eyes darted away. Well, maybe I got the timing wrong. The point is, Bella's still sick. Then maybe you should consider other causes, Sarah said, her voice sharper than intended. Because it's not my pool. Linda's demeanor shifted, her vulnerability replaced by something colder. I think you're being deliberately obtuse, Sarah. I'm not asking you to drain the pool. I'm asking you to be a decent neighbor. I am being a decent neighbor. I spent $200 on professional testing to prove my pool isn't the problem. What more do you want? I want you to take responsibility for what you're doing to my dog. The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at Linda, seeing her clearly for the first time. The tears, the desperation, the guilt-tripping it was all performance. But why? I'm not doing anything to your dog, Sarah said slowly, and I'm not going to let you blame me for something I didn't cause. Linda's mask slipped completely. We'll see about that, she said, and closed the door. Sarah stood on the porch, her heart pounding. Something was very wrong here, she thought. About Linda's expensive accessories, her perfectly maintained appearance, despite supposedly crushing vet bills. She thought about the convenient timing of Bella's illness, always coinciding with Linda's requests for Sarah to modify her pool maintenance. Most disturbing of all, she thought about Linda's claim that she'd seen Sarah adding chemicals at night. Sarah had never done pool maintenance after dark, not once, but someone had been in her backyard at night. She'd found footprints in the soft earth around the pool filter housing. She'd assumed it was raccoons or the landscaping crew. Now she wasn't so sure. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Bella's genuine suffering, Linda's performance, and the pieces that didn't fit. At 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made herself tea. As she stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the pool illuminated by underwater lights, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure moved through her backyard, keeping to the shadows. The person was carrying a container of some kind. Sarah watched, frozen, as the figure approached her pool. It was Linda. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She started to dial 911, then stopped. What was she going to report? Her neighbor was in her backyard, but she hadn't done anything yet. The police would likely treat it as a neighbor dispute. Instead, Sarah crept to her bedroom and retrieved the small security camera her brother had given her for Christmas. She'd never installed it, but now she was grateful for his overprotective nature. Moving carefully to avoid detection, she positioned herself at the window and began recording. Linda knelt beside the pool, unscrewing the cap of what looked like a bleach container. Sarah watched in horror as her neighbor poured the contents directly into the water, then stirred it with a long-handled pool skimmer, Sarah's own skimmer, which Linda must have taken from the equipment shed. The whole process took less than 5 minutes. Linda replaced the skimmer, tucked the empty container under her arm, and slipped back through the hedge, separating their properties. Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the camera. Linda wasn't just lying about the source of Bella's illness, she was creating it. She was poisoning her own dog to frame Sarah. But why? What could Linda possibly gain from such a sick, twisted scheme? Sarah was about to find out that some neighbors weren't just problematic, they were dangerous. And Linda Morrison had plans that went far beyond making Sarah feel guilty about her pool. The next morning, Sarah barely slept for the remainder of the night, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd witnessed. By 6 a.m., she was at her kitchen table, reviewing the video footage on her phone. The image quality was grainy in the darkness, but her hands trembled as she saved the video to her laptop and backed it up to cloud storage. This was evidence of ... What exactly? Trespassing, vandalism, animal abuse, all of the above. This is Rebecca Torres from the City Environmental Health Department. We've received a formal complaint regarding potential chemical contamination from your residential pool. We need to schedule an inspection. Sarah's stomach dropped. An inspection. The complaint alleges that excessive chemical runoff from your property is creating a public health hazard. Are you available this Friday at 10 a.m.? Yes, but I should tell you, I just had my pool professionally tested 2 days ago. Everything was within normal parameters. We'll need to conduct our own independent assessment. Please have all pool maintenance records, chemical purchase receipts, and equipment specifications ready for review. Also, we'll need access to your backyard and any drainage systems. After hanging up, Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief. Linda had moved fast. Too fast. This wasn't a spontaneous complaint born of desperation. This was calculated. Sarah called David Martinez at Aquaclear Pool Services. David, it's Sarah Chen. I need to ask you something important. When you tested my pool water Tuesday, did you notice anything unusual about the chemical composition? No, ma'am. Like I said, those were textbook readings. Why? What if someone added a large amount of bleach to the pool after your testing? Would that show up in a new test? David was quiet for a moment. Well, yes, it would spike the chlorine levels dramatically. But Ms. Chen, household bleach in pool water would be extremely dangerous. It could create chlorine gas, cause chemical burns, damage the pool equipment. And if an animal drank that water, but I think someone else might be. Sarah spent the morning researching Linda Morrison. Linda had lived in the neighborhood for 8 years, moving in after a contentious divorce. Her ex-husband, according to court documents, had been granted primary custody of their children after allegations of manipulative and erratic behavior. Linda had been required to undergo psychological evaluation. More concerning were the reviews Linda had left for local businesses over the years. A pattern emerged of escalating complaints, threats of legal action, and demands for compensation. She'd sued a dry cleaner, a veterinary clinic, and a landscaping company. All cases had been settled out of court. But it was Linda's employment, history that made Sarah's blood run cold. Until 2 years ago, Linda had worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative specializing in veterinary medications. She would know exactly what chemicals could harm an animal and how to make the injuries look accidental. Through the peephole, she saw a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit. Ms. Chen, I'm Detective Ray Kowalski, Metro Police. I understand you're having a dispute with your neighbor regarding your pool. Sarah's heart hammered. A dispute? I wouldn't call it that. Mind if I come in? Mrs. Morrison filed a report claiming harassment and property damage. She says you've been deliberately contaminating shared water sources to harm her pet, Sarah. Opened the door, her mind reeling, or rather, a deliberate misrepresentation. In her living room, Detective Kowalski pulled out a small notebook. Mrs. Morrison says you've been adding excessive chemicals to your pool, knowing the runoff would affect her dog. Maintenance, despite her requests, Detective, I have video evidence that Mrs. Morrison has been trespassing on my property and adding chemicals to my pool herself. Kowalski's eyebrows rose. Video evidence. Sarah showed him the footage on her laptop. The detective watched intently, his expression growing more serious. This was taken when, last night, around 2 a.m., she poured what appeared to be bleach directly into my pool water, and you believe she's been doing this to make her own dog sick. Detective, I had my pool professionally tested. The water was perfectly safe. But if someone keeps adding household bleach, it would create exactly the kind of chemical burns Mrs. Morrison's been complaining about. Kowalski closed his notebook. Ms. Chen, filing false reports, trespassing, and potentially insurance fraud. Insurance fraud. Mrs. Morrison mentioned she'd contacted her homeowner's insurance about property damage from chemical contamination. If she's manufacturing the evidence, double quotes, Sarah felt a chill. How far was she planning to take this? That's what we need to find out. I'm going to need a copy of that video, and I'd like to have our tech team enhance the image quality. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you install more comprehensive security cameras. After Detective Kowalski left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, trying to process everything. Linda wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a predator who'd weaponized her own pet to destroy Sarah's life. But why Sarah? What had she done to deserve this? The answer came at 3 p.m. when Sarah's phone rang again. Ms. Chen, this is Janet Walsh from Riverside Realty. I represent a client who's very interested in purchasing your property. We're prepared to make an offer significantly above market value. Sarah's blood turned to ice. I'm not selling, but you might want to reconsider. My client is aware of the environmental issues you're facing, the pending city investigation, the neighbor complaints. These things can drag on for years and cost tens of thousands in legal fees. My client is willing to overlook these problems and offer you a clean exit. Who is your client? I'm not at liberty to say, but they're a local developer with experience in challenging properties. Sarah hung up without another word. The pieces were falling into place. Linda's scheme wasn't just about harassment, it was about forcing Sarah to sell her house at a loss. Someone wanted her property badly enough to orchestrate an elaborate fraud to get it. But who and why? The answer was closer than Sarah thought. That evening, Sarah installed 2 additional security cameras with night vision, positioning them to cover her entire backyard. She also changed all her locks and installed motion sensor lights. At 11 p.m., she settled in to watch the feeds from her laptop. If Linda was going to make another move, Sarah would be ready. She didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensors activated. But it wasn't Linda creeping through the shadows, it was a man Sarah didn't recognize, wearing dark clothing and carrying a large duffel bag. He moved with practiced stealth, heading directly for her pool equipment. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched him open the bag and remove several containers of chemicals. This wasn't someone adding a simple bleach solution. This was industrial grade sabotage. The man was systematically contaminating her pool with what looked like enough, the kind that would justify shutting down the property, issuing massive fines, and forcing an immediate sale. Sarah reached for her phone to call 911, but stopped when she saw another figure emerge from the hedge. Linda Morrison walked into frame, no longer playing the role of desperate pet owner. She was dressed in dark clothing, her demeanor confident and businesslike. She approached the man and handed him something, an envelope. Payment. Sarah started recording on her phone as she dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911. What's your emergency? This is Sarah Chen at 1247 Maple Street. I have 2 people trespassing on my property, contaminating my pool with industrial chemicals. I have them on video right now. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? I don't. No. But they're destroying my property and creating what could be a real environmental hazard. Units are being dispatched. Stay inside and away from the windows. Sarah watched through her laptop as the man finished his work. He and Linda exchanged a few words, then both disappeared into the night. The whole operation had taken less than 15 minutes. 7 minutes later, police sirens wailed in the distance. By morning, Sarah's quiet suburban street had been transformed into a crime scene. Detective Kowalski found Sarah on her front porch, wrapped in a blanket, despite the warm morning. We arrested Mrs. Morrison at 6 a.m., he said. She's being held without bail on charges of conspiracy, environmental terrorism, animal abuse, and fraud. The man with her is Marcus Webb, a freelance problem solver with a record of similar schemes. 3 days after Linda's arrest, Sarah received a call that made her blood run cold. Ms. Chen, this is Michael Harrison from Harrison & Associates. I represent Meridian Development Corporation. I believe we need to discuss your current ... situation. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. I have nothing to discuss with you. Oh, but I think you do. You see, despite recent events, my client remains very interested in your property. We're prepared to offer you $150,000 above market value, plus coverage of all your legal expenses and environmental remediation costs. Are you serious? Your company just tried to have me framed for environmental terrorism. Harrison's laugh was cold. Miss Chen, I think you're confused. Meridian Development had no involvement in Mrs. Morrison's unfortunate mental breakdown. We're simply a legitimate business trying to help a homeowner in distress. And if I refuse, then you'll face the consequences of your choices. The environmental damage to your property is quite real now, regardless of how it occurred. The city will require expensive cleanup. Your homeowner's insurance has already been notified and may not cover deliberate contamination. Your legal bills will mount. We're offering you a way out. Sarah's hands shook with rage. You're threatening me. I'm offering you a business proposition. You have 48 hours to consider it. The line went dead. Sarah immediately called Detective Kowalski, who listened grimly to the conversation. They're not backing down, he said. Even with Morrison and Webb in custody, they're doubling down on the pressure. The problem is, they're right about one thing: the environmental damage is real now. The hazmat team's preliminary report shows significant chemical contamination in your pool, filtration system, and surrounding soil. But that's evidence of their crime. It's also your problem to fix. The city's environmental department doesn't care who caused the contamination. They just want it cleaned up, and that's going to cost you at least $50,000, maybe more. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Even victory felt like defeat when the cleanup costs could bankrupt her. That evening, Sarah's doorbell rang. She peered through the peephole and saw a woman in an expensive suit, flanked by two men in dark clothing. Ms. Chen, I'm Victoria Meridian, CEO of Meridian Development. I believe we should talk. Sarah's pulse quickened. The woman behind the conspiracy was standing on her doorstep. Against her better judgment, she opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. Victoria Meridian was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and predatory eyes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. May I come in? I think we can resolve this situation to everyone's benefit. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you should be. You see, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen dozens of homeowners in your exact situation. They all think they can fight the system, stand on principle, protect their little slice of paradise. Do you know where they all end up? Sarah said nothing. Bankrupted by legal fees, their properties seized by the city, their credit destroyed. They lose everything and end up renting apartments in neighborhoods they used to look down on. Is that really what you want? What I want is for you to leave my property. Victoria's smile widened. Your property, Miss Chen. You don't seem to understand. This ceased being your property the moment my associate contaminated it with industrial chemicals. The city will condemn it within the week. The environmental remediation costs will exceed the home's value. Your mortgage company will accelerate the loan when they learn about the hazmat situation. You'll lose everything. We'll see about that. Yes, we will. But I'm offering you a chance to walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from here. The threat was implicit, but clear. Sarah slammed the door and immediately called Detective Kowalski. She was here, Sarah said. Victoria Meridian. She's threatening me. What exactly did she say? She basically told me I was going to lose everything unless I sold to her. And she made it clear I should move far away. That's not technically illegal, unfortunately. She's being careful with her words, so she can destroy my life and face no consequences. Not if we can prove she orchestrated the original conspiracy. But that's going to take time, and you need help now. Sarah spent the night researching Victoria Meridian and her company. What she found was a pattern of predatory development practices across 3 states. Meridian Development specialized in acquiring properties in gentrifying neighborhoods, often using questionable tactics to force out existing residents. But it was a news article from Phoenix that made Sarah's stomach turn. 2 years ago, a family named Rodriguez had fought Meridian Development's attempt to acquire their property for a luxury shopping complex. The family had refused repeated offers, citing the sentimental value of their generational home. 3 months later, their house had burned down in a mysterious fire. The insurance investigation found evidence of arson, but no arrests were ever made. The Rodriguez family, financially devastated, had sold the land to Meridian Development for a fraction of its value. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the article. Victoria Meridian wasn't just ruthless, she was dangerous, and Sarah was standing in her way. The next morning brought more bad news. Sarah's insurance company called to inform her that her homeowner's policy was being canceled effective immediately due to environmental contamination and criminal activity on the premises. "But I was the victim of the criminal activity," Sarah protested. "Nevertheless, the property now represents an unacceptable risk. You have 30 days to find alternative coverage, though I should warn you that most companies won't insure a property with an active environmental hazmat situation." An hour later, the mortgage company called Dade received notice of the insurance cancellation and were requiring immediate proof of alternative coverage, or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. Sarah sat in her kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and bills, feeling utterly defeated. Victoria Meridian's prediction was coming true. Even though Sarah had exposed the conspiracy, the damage was already done. The system was grinding her down exactly as planned. But then Sarah remembered something Detective Kowalski had said, dozens of homeowners in her exact situation. What if they could all fight back together? Sarah spent the afternoon reaching out to other victims of Meridian Development's tactics: the Rodriguez family in Phoenix, the Johnsons in Denver who'd lost their auto shop, the elderly couple in Portland whose rental property had been condemned after mysterious code violations. One by one, she found them. People who'd been destroyed by Victoria Meridian's machine, left with nothing but anger and the knowledge that they'd been cheated. But Sarah also found something else: a pattern of financial irregularities in Meridian Development's projects, city contracts awarded without proper bidding, environmental impact studies that had been falsified, zoning variances approved despite community opposition. By evening, Sarah had assembled a network of victims and a growing pile of evidence suggesting that Meridian Development wasn't just predatory, it was criminal. She called Detective Kowalski with her findings. "This is bigger than we thought," he said after reviewing Sarah's research. "If even half of this is accurate, we're looking at a multi-state conspiracy involving fraud, bribery, and racketeering. But Sarah, you need to be careful. If Victoria Meridian realizes you're building a case against her, ... double quotes, she what? Burned down my house like she did to the Rodriguez family. Maybe. These people have already shown they're willing to poison animals and contaminate neighborhoods. Don't underestimate what they might do to protect their operation." That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. She'd gone from being a victim to being a threat herself, and that made her infinitely more dangerous to people like Victoria Meridian. At 3 a.m., she was startled by the sound of breaking glass. Sarah crept to her bedroom window and looked down at her backyard. The floodlights revealed a scene of deliberate destruction. Her garden had been trampled, her patio furniture overturned, and spray paint covered her back fence with a simple message: "Sell, or else." But it was what she saw next that made her blood freeze. A figure in dark clothing was walking calmly away from her property, carrying what looked like a gas can. The person stopped at the edge of her yard, turned back toward the house, and raised a hand in a casual wave. Even in the darkness, Sarah could see the cold smile on Victoria Meridian's face. The message was clear: Sarah's house was next. Sarah grabbed her phone and called 911, but by the time police arrived, Victoria was gone. The only evidence was the vandalism and the lingering smell of gasoline near Sarah's front door. "She's escalating," Detective Kowalski said grimly. "We need to move fast. I mean, we're going to set a trap, and you're going to be the bait." Sarah stared at him. "What kind of trap?" "The kind that will either expose Victoria Meridian's entire operation or get you killed trying." As dawn broke over her vandalized property, Sarah realized that her quiet suburban life was over forever. She was about to enter a world where the stakes were life and death, and where the only way to survive was to become as ruthless as her enemies. The war for Sarah's life was about to become a war for justice itself. Detective Kowalski's plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Sarah would publicly announce her intention to sell to Meridian Development, then wear a wire to the final negotiation meeting. The goal was to get Victoria Meridian to confessed to the conspiracy on tapping enough evidence to bring down her entire operation. She's arrogant, Kowalski explained as he fitted Sarah with the recording device. She thinks she's won. People like that love to gloat, to explain exactly how clever they've been. Sarah's hands shook as she adjusted the tiny microphone. And if she realizes I'm recording, then you run, and hope we get there in time. The meeting was set for 6 p.m. at Victoria's office in the Meridian building downtown. Sarah had called that morning, voice carefully modulated to sound defeated. I'm ready to discuss terms, she'd told Victoria's assistant. Ms. Meridian will be pleased to hear that, came the reply. She's been hoping you'd see reason. Now, sitting in her car, outside the gleaming glass tower, Sarah watched the sun set over the city. Somewhere in the building above, Victoria Meridian was probably celebrating her victory. She had no idea that her entire empire was about to crumble. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Kowalski. We're in position. You've got this. But as Sarah walked through the marble lobby toward the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. Victoria Meridian hadn't built her empire by being careless. What if she suspected something? The elevator climbed to the 20th floor in silence. Sarah's reflection in the polished doors showed a woman on the edge, pale, hollow-eyed, but determined. She'd come too far to back down now. Victoria's office was a monument to predatory capitalism. Floor 2 ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while the walls displayed architectural renderings of luxury developments built on the bones of destroyed communities. A photo on the desk showed Victoria shaking hands with city officials, the same officials who'd fast-tracked her projects despite community opposition. Victoria rose from behind her massive desk, arms spread in mock welcome. I'm so glad you've come to your senses. Please, sit. Sarah took the offered chair, acutely aware of the recording device against her chest. I don't have much choice, do I? Oh, but you do. You're choosing to be practical rather than stubborn. That's wisdom. Victoria poured 2 glasses of champagne. From a bottle that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment to new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. Sarah didn't drink. Let's just get this over with. Of course, business first. Victoria pulled out a contract. I've increased our offer to $200,000 above market value. That should more than cover your ... difficulties. And all I have to do is sign away my home and disappear. Disappear is such a harsh word. I prefer relocate. There are so many lovely places to live. Arizona, perhaps, or Florida, somewhere far from here. Sarah stared at the contract. You're very confident this will work. It always works. People think they can fight the system, but the system always wins. Always. Like it did with the Rodriguez family in Phoenix. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. I'm not familiar with that case, really, because they fought you too, right up until their house mysteriously burned down. House fires are tragic, but they're hardly uncommon. Old wiring, space heaters, candles left burning. Victoria's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes had gone cold. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She was getting close to something. What about the Johnsons in Denver? The elderly couple in Portland? All those families who just happened to face catastrophic problems right after they refused to sell to you? Ms. Chen, you seem to be under the impression that I'm responsible for every misfortune that befalls people who make poor business decisions. That's quite a conspiracy theory, is it? Or is it just good business to you? Victoria set down her champagne glass with deliberate precision. You know, Sarah, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've learned that there are 2 types of people in the world. Those who adapt to changing circumstances, and those who get crushed by them. The secret is knowing which type you're dealing with, and which type am I. That depends. Are you here to sign that contract, or are you here to play detective? Sarah's blood ran cold. Victoria knew. Somehow, she knew. I'm here to understand, Sarah said carefully. You've destroyed my life. Don't I deserve to know why? Victoria laughed. Sound like breaking glass. Deserve. Oh, my dear Sarah, you deserve exactly what you get. Nothing more, nothing less. She pressed a button on her desk, and the office door opened. 2 large men in suits entered, their faces impassive. You see, Victoria continued, I've been watching you very carefully these past few days. your little research project, your calls to my former ... business associates. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the recording device, but Victoria shook her head. "I wouldn't bother. This office is equipped with the latest electronic countermeasures. Your little wire has been broadcasting nothing but static for the past 10 minutes. The trap had been turned inside out. Sarah was no longer the hunter, she was the prey. You wanted to know why." Victoria stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights. "It's quite simple, really. Your property sits on the last undeveloped corner of what will become Harbor District's premier luxury shopping and residential complex. A $500 million project that will transform an entire neighborhood, so you destroy people's lives for money. I create opportunities. I bring prosperity to declining areas. I turn urban blight into economic engines. The fact that some people can't adapt to progress, well, that's unfortunate, but inevitable. And the Rodriguez family, the house fire," Victoria turned back toward Sarah, her expression serene. "Accidents happen. Gas leaks, electrical problems, disgruntled contractors who don't get paid on time. The world is full of hazards for people who don't know how to navigate them safely. You're admitting to murder. I'm admitting to nothing. I'm simply observing that life is dangerous for those who make enemies of the wrong people." Sarah felt the walls closing in. The two men had moved closer, blocking her exit. The recording device was useless, and Victoria Meridian was about to add another victim to her collection. But Sarah had one advantage that Victoria didn't know about. She wasn't alone. At that moment, the office lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Victoria spun toward the window as spotlights blazed from the building across the street. "Meridian Development. This is the FBI. The building is surrounded." Victoria's face went white. "That's impossible. How did they—" "Because I wasn't the only one recording," Sarah said, standing up. "Detective Kowalski didn't trust your electronic countermeasures any more than I did. That's why he had federal agents with directional microphones positioned in the building across the street. The office door burst open as federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn." Victoria's bodyguards raised their hands immediately, but Victoria herself seemed frozen in disbelief. "Victoria Meridian, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, arson, and murder," the lead agent announced. As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, she looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "Neither were you," Sarah replied. "I expected someone smarter." But even as Victoria was led away, Sarah knew the victory was incomplete. Meridian Development was a hydro cut off one head, and others would appear. Victoria's arrest would shut down the current operation. But her associates would regroup, adapt, find new ways to prey on vulnerable communities. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. However, as Sarah walked out of the Meridian building, surrounded by federal agents, she realized something important had changed. She was no longer a victim. She was a fighter, and she'd just proved that even the most powerful predators could be brought down by someone who refused to give up. The question now was, what would she do with that power? The answer would determine not just her own future, but the future of every person Victoria Meridian had marked for destruction. Sarah had started this fight to save her home. Now she was fighting to save her entire community. And this time she was going to win.